Hello and welcome back into another episode of Ohio Sports Zone. I'm John Kosas alongside Mitchell Lyons. And Mitchell, this last weekend Ohio hosted its first home track meet of the year, the Ohio Cherry Blossom Invitational, and they thrived. Ohio had 7 of the top 10 finishers in the 100, and it was all led by Olivia Mayfield, a stellar sprinter who finished in 12 seconds and 52 hundredths of a second. And then, of course, if you're going to have 7 of the top 10 finishers in the 100, look at the finals in the 4x1. Both relay teams were Ohio relay teams. They swept that. That wasn't the only event that they swept, though. Ohio swept the javelin toss as well. That means all 3 of the top finishers were from Ohio, and they were led by Ashley Billheimer, who got the win. She threw 9 feet further than any other player.
Yeah, John, they were absolutely terrific this weekend. You mentioned the 7 top 110 finishes in the 100 meter. They also were great in the 800 meter, where Haley Stagmeyer won it, clocking a time of 2:21. Senior Kaylee Hilbrand won the women's 5K, posting a time of over 18, something I could never do, John. That was phenomenal.
Yeah, Haley Stagmiller ended up winning the 800 by about 8 seconds, and then Caroline Hildebren ended up winning the 5K, and here's the big thing. She ended up having a time of 18 minutes and then just under 20 seconds. Guess what? She also ended up having a win by over 35 seconds. She ended up finishing 38 seconds in front of the second place finisher, and that's close to a lap in front of second place. You talk about pack running and how essential it is for any type of long distance athlete. She was doing the work all by herself on a windy and cold day. She did it the hard way, but ended up having complete and total domination before second, third, and fourth place finished behind her. That means she started strong and she just kept pushing through, and that pack was never able to catch back up to her.
Yeah, it was awesome. Not only was she part of that winning team, she also was part of the women's 4x400 meter team, which won. Also on the team was Caitlin Logan and Stewart, and then Huffman as well. They clocked a little bit over 4:21. Ohio was terrific all weekend. The weather, maybe not great, but Ohio was.
Yeah, and what they managed to do very well was they kept Jessie Slingoff, a Kent State runner, off the scoreboard for the top 2 places throughout the meet. Slingoff in high school, when she was at Beaumont, that's a Northeastern Ohio high school, never finished outside the top 2 in her 4 years in high school. She's a dominant runner. She had a great high school career, but now she's with the top dogs in college, and she ended up getting shown up by Ohio and 5 other schools, including Marshall and Rio Grande.
Little different when you're in Athens and competing in the MAC. Ohio also dominated at home. They're at home again this weekend, where they compete in the All-Ohio Track and Field Championships. That is also here in Athens. On to the golf team, where, John, we have to give a special shout-out to Peyton White and Haley Herenowich. Not only did they dominate on the course, which we'll get to in a minute, they were Ohio's Scholar Athlete of the Week. So congratulations to both of them.
Peyton White is a finance major, and Haley Herenowich is a journalism major here at Ohio University. Peyton White had an outstanding finish at the Hoosier Invitational this past week. White tied for first place, shot equal after a 2 under par first round, and he paced the Bobcats, where they eventually ended up finishing 4th in the tournament.
He was great. And then today he was named MAC Men's Golfer of the Week. Peyton was tremendous, leading Ohio to a great finish. And the women's team, they were also phenomenal. They had 4 people in the top 20 in their match this weekend. Terrific job by the women.
The women's golf team has done very well in recent years in getting better and better. These past couple years, they've really started to improve behind Angelina Codine and Haley Herenowich. And in addition to that, you've been able to see the men's team really start to show up in this last year or so.
You definitely would love to see that continue and the golfers start coming up, because you don't want to rely on Haley and Peyton the rest of the week. But that's all the time we have for this block. Coming up after the commercial break, we hit the baseball diamond for Ohio baseball. Welcome back into Ohio Sports Zone, where we now go and talk about the baseball team, where, John, the weather was not very good. Seems to be a theme here with this weekend. But the baseball team was in Ball State Friday. They earned their first extra innings win of the season. And kind of a wild one. It was 6-6 going into the 10th. Ohio batted around and managed to take the win. They dropped their next 2 games. But we talked about last week about the baseball team and their offense maybe putting up good numbers but not scoring. Not so much. In the 3 games against a very good Ball State pitching staff, they scored 32 runs.
This Ohio Bobcats team traveled all the way to Muncie, and they faced one of the top pitching staffs as far as starting rotations are concerned in the MAC. I would say Ball State and Kent State are probably the top 2. Ball State was making up ground until this week. The starting staff didn't do too poorly in the first game Friday night. The relievers, once they got into extra innings, as you just mentioned, let Ohio roll around the lineup and score 6 runs in 1 inning. That's not what Ball State's looking for. And then in their next game, they gave up 14 runs in a win versus Ohio, a loss for the Ohio Bobcats, 17-14. Finally, Ball State came out on Sunday and they ended up shutting down the Bobcats' bats. The final score of that game was 20-3. Ohio did some more traveling, though. They traveled to Eastern Kentucky, where they ended up getting a 10-4 win last night, and it was an interesting win. Eastern Kentucky came out strong. Ohio battled back, and eventually there was some late-game heroics behind 2 hits and 3 RBIs from John Adrian, 3 hits and 3 runs scored by the freshman Rudy Rott, and finally, an RBI sacrifice fly from Tony Giannini.
Absolutely. Ohio, the offense was there. Problem was, in that series against Ball State, they gave up 43 runs. Not going to win a big series, but they did get 1 win, and they won the other night against Eastern Kentucky. Ohio, the offense has been great. They have 10 hits in at least 16 games this year. They've been great. They're finally starting to score runs. The problem, though, is that bullpen. It's just not there yet.
Yeah, Ohio has over 5 hitters that are hitting over 300. It's 5 everyday stars, and there's 1 guy who comes off the bench. You have a beautiful 1-2 start. Mitch Longo has the best batting average on the team. He's the leadoff batter. The second batter is Manny DeJesus, who has a .340 batting average. The problem is shortstop Tyler Finkler broke his middle finger on his throwing hand in Friday's game. He was trying to lay down a bunt, and the ball glanced off it. That means he'll be out past the games against Kent State this next weekend. You lose a lot of, not power necessarily with losing Finkler, but when you lose a guy who routinely gets on base. Over the season, Finkler was hitting over 400. It was right before MAC play. Now he's right around 324. You're losing a lot of production, and you're losing a lot of speed on the base pass, let alone one of your better fielders.
And you hate to have that coming up for a Kent State team that has always been the class of the MAC. Plus, your shortstop's always your captain of the infield, so that's another big loss. You mentioned power, but they still would have John Adrian, who has 9 home runs. That's tied for 14th in Division I baseball. He's also top 25 in total bases. He's been one of the big power guys for this Ohio lineup.
You have to remember where John Adrian plays, too. John Adrian plays at Bob Wren Stadium, where center field is about 400 feet deep, and then right field and left field are still over 340 feet unless you're hitting it right in the corner. Bob Wren is one of the bigger caverns in the NCAA, and particularly in the MAC. Ohio is going to end up traveling to Western Michigan later this year. When they go there, John Adrian could have a field day. He already has 27 RBIs. That's good for first on the team. Second on the team is freshman Rudy Rott with 24. You're seeing a lot of production from those 2 bats in particular, and they're back-to-back in the order on any given day.
There are MLB teams that have smaller fields than the Ohio, but they are at home this week where they play Buffalo. And John, Buffalo, not a great record, 9-15. You look for Ohio to pick up some wins here.
Yeah, Ohio really needs to start picking up because they're 12-16 on the season. They're the returning MAC champions. They have a title to defend right now, and the pitching has really let them down. The only great pitching you have is Jake Rowan coming out of the bullpen. Rowan has a 1.4 ERA, and this last weekend, or during the week rather, against Eastern Kentucky, he ended up pitching 2 innings of 1-hit baseball, didn't allow any runs to cross the plate, and that was good to preserve a Bobcat victory.
Yeah, it's been some high-scoring games, so go out and support your Bobcats. They're going to need it. They got to start getting on a roll. They got hot last year. You look, hopefully this Buffalo game can be the start of getting hot again this year.
Mitchell, you got to remember, last year at this time, Ohio was not expected to win the MAC. Ohio was actually picked last year to come in last place in the MAC. It was a surprising run for this Bobcats baseball team, and really all it took was them getting hot at the right time, right before the tournament, where they eventually battled to an extra inning victory against Western Michigan. They hit 3 home runs in the 11th inning in one of the more exciting championship games I have witnessed in MAC play.
Yeah, it just takes getting hot at the right time, and Ohio can do that. You've seen in a lot of tournaments that any team can get hot at the right time. That's all we have for right now. Stay tuned. Coming up, softball on Ohio Sports Zone.
Back to Ohio Sports Zone. I'm John Kosas alongside Mitchell Lyons. Mitchell, we just talked about a Bobcat baseball team that is struggling with starting pitching, but now it's time to talk about the Ohio softball team, which has quite the opposite issue, and it's that Savannah Jo Dorsey might be the most dominant player in the NCAA. Ohio picked up a doubleheader victory this past weekend, 4-1 and 4-2, behind the strong arm of Savannah Jo Dorsey, who had 2 complete games. In 14 innings, she struck out 23 batters, and that's just the beginning of the story. That, first off, is a record for Ohio. A second record she set for Ohio was that those 2 wins were win number 55 and 56 in her career as a Bobcat. That's another MAC record. Most wins for Ohio, and what's really intriguing about it is that she's a junior who missed 2/3 of her sophomore year, and she already has the most wins for Ohio. There's no telling what this young pitcher is going to do. And to show more how dominant Savannah Jo Dorsey has been this year, opponents are batting just 160 against her. All right, that's really solid, but she's striking out 42.4% of the batters she faces. That means only 58% of batters are even making contact against her, whether they're grounding out, flying out, or getting a hit.
She's been absolutely terrific. If you were with us last week, you heard about how she dominated number 12 Kentucky. She's been great all year long for Ohio. She has 6 shutouts on this year. The problem is, though, she doesn't get a lot of run support. Ohio has 8 people that bat 240 or below. A lot of those people are below the dreaded Mendoza line of below 200. Ohio has 3 people that have 25 hits or less on the season. She's not getting many run support, and that really has not been helpful for Ohio. And she did sit out Sunday's game against Ball State where they lost, and Danielle Stein pitched. She allowed 6 runs in 6 innings, tried to get her some rest, but they could have used Savannah. She is getting, though, when you look at this Ohio offense, they have a few really good hitters. Michaela Cooper and Madison Clater, they have 14 home runs combined this year. They have 54 RBIs, which are good for 45%. By the way, their 14 homers, the rest of the team combined has 5. So really, it's been a 2-person offense when you look at power numbers, RBIs. They have 35% of the team's total bases this year.
They have a 2-person pitching staff. Why not use a 2-person offense? This weekend, they're playing against Toledo. Toledo has just 8 wins compared to 25 losses. That's a good weekend to get out Danielle Stein on night number 1. To see if you can rest Savannah Jo Dorsey, because something that concerns me is the fact that she pitched 14 innings on Saturday. And remember, that's putting a lot of stress on a bicep that was torn by overpitching. She was throwing the ball too much last year. That's why she ended up getting injured. I would be very cautious with my star pitcher before the playoffs, because you know you're going to want to use her on any win-or-go-home situation.
You pretty much would want to use her almost every night in the playoffs. So I would love, you obviously want to get her some rest. I agree with you, John, totally. The problem is, though, if you have, then you have to rely on an offense that just has not been there. They only have 2 players hitting .310 or above this year.
And hey, .310 or above, that's a victory. It's how poorly the rest of the team is hitting. If the rest of your team's hitting about .250, you're not in bad shape, but maybe Savannah needs to talk to her younger sister, Michaela Dorsey, who's hitting just .155 this year. The young bat needs to learn a little bit from her sister. Maybe she needs to play against her sister, because if she can get a hit against Savannah Jo Dorsey, she could probably get a hit against anyone in the NCAA right now.
That's a tall task, though, John. There are many teams that can't get hits off of Savannah Jo Dorsey. She averages 4 hits allowed a game. That's really tough to get hit off her, even if you have seen her your whole life.
The thing about Savannah Jo Dorsey is it's difficult to find a weakness. She does not walk a lot of batters. She does not allow extra base hits. And when she allows hits, she's allowing opponents to hit 160 against her. Her whip is extremely low. Her strikeout to walk ratio is through the roof. She strikes out almost half the batters who faces her. If she is not MAC Player of the Year, I'm surprised at the end of this year.
There'd have to be a revote or something because she has to be MAC Player of the Year. She's been great all year long. You look, there's no one that can really touch her either. Softball pitcher is the most important position. She's been not only one of the best pitchers in the MAC, but one of the best pitchers in the entire country. She would have to be MAC Player of the Year. She's won MAC East Player of the Week several times.
What makes her a little bit more important as a pitcher for the softball team rather than the baseball team is you can pitch her in back-to-back days or, hey, even back-to-back games as we found out this past weekend and not have an issue because the strain of throwing underhand is way less than throwing overhand, meaning she can be dominant enough to win over half of Ohio's games if she needs to. And that seems to be what we've seen after the first week or so of the season.
Absolutely. She has been dominant, and softball, you have the arm. You can throw twice in the same day. You can throw 2-3 times in the same weekend. She's been awesome. Hopefully, you come out and support her this weekend. Coming up next on Ohio Sports Zone, Good Cop, Bad Cop. Stay with us.
We're back on Ohio Sports Zone. My name is Nick Mullins, and we are playing Good Cop, Bad Cop. The Ohio softball team bounced back on Tuesday with a sweep of Kent State. They got 2 wins out of it. This was coming off of a 3-game losing streak against Ball State. Can the softball team get this going? Keep it going throughout the year?
I absolutely think the softball team can. We just talked about how great Savannah Jo Dorsey has been. And when you have a dominant pitcher softball, remember, these games aren't 10-9. These games aren't 12-8. Softball games are normally very low scoring. 4-3 is a high scoring softball game. And Savannah Jo Dorsey doesn't allow 4 runs a game in the first place. So you definitely look at Ohio. They have speed. They have a few hitters in the middle order that can hit for power, and you have the dominant pitcher that she can pitch on a nightly basis and dominate. She's dominated the MAC since she got here at Ohio pretty much, and I look for Ohio to, when they have Savannah Jo Dorsey healthy, they won the MAC, she stays healthy, definitely think that this is the start of their hot streak.
That's the big thing, Mitchell. I'm pretty sure you just said if she stays healthy. The reason she wasn't highly recruited and isn't going to a power conference school right now is because her senior season in high school wasn't exactly a full season. She was injured there too. She gets injured her sophomore year. Obviously, you're not hoping she gets injured. You're not saying she will get injured, but there is a risk, particularly with the amount of innings that she is throwing, that she does get injured. I think if she gets injured, what she have behind her, because Danielle Stein started the season off very well, but in her last couple of starts, she's allowed 6+ runs in each of her last 3. And the offense, we've talked about a lot in this show already. It has not been very good. That's something that worries me for the future of the softball team.
You mentioned the innings real quick. You mentioned the innings. Softball innings doesn't really matter because you're throwing underhand. You can throw 14 innings in a game or several days. So you don't really worry about innings. It's just a matter of keeping her ready to go.
You don't worry about them as much. You still do have to worry about them. Remember, last year, the reason she injured her bicep wasn't because she was throwing incorrectly. It wasn't a freak accident. It was strain. There was too much strain on her arm because it was swollen, and they threw her out in a game. They threw her out in the game. She gets injured. If that happens again this year, because they're trying to get the number 1 seed, remember, they're number 2 right now, and they're number 2 to rival Miami of Ohio. If you're trying to throw her against Miami and she gets injured the week before a tournament, Ohio might be one and done.
You hope you don't do that again, but if it is against Miami, maybe throw her anyway.
All right, we're going to Ohio baseball now. The Ohio baseball team won on Tuesday also. They topped Eastern Kentucky with a 10-4 win. This snapped a 2-game losing streak like we talked about earlier. Can they keep this going to get to the form they were last year when they won the MAC?
It's tough because they have components, but they have also some weaknesses that you look at. But when you look at this team, they can score with anybody in the MAC. They have a great offense. They have multiple, 6 hitters hitting over 300. They scored 32 runs against one of the best pitching staffs. John said maybe the best pitching staff in the MAC. They scored 32 runs against them, 14 in one game, 6 in one inning. This offense is phenomenal. They can score with anybody.
They have great rotational players at Ball State. The bullpen isn't so much the same, and remember, Ohio scored a lot of runs late in their only win against Ball State. They were playing games where it was sub-freezing. It's not great baseball weather, particularly for a pitcher who has to try and keep their arm loose. And Ohio only scored 3 on Sunday, the only day where there was decent weather in Muncie, Indiana. I will admit, it was a great regular week game out of conference against Eastern Kentucky. The bats were working. The pitching was going well. Jake Rowan came out. He did his thing. The only problem is consistency. It's something you haven't seen from this Bobcats team, whether it's from the starting mound or from the bullpen, minus Jake Rowan, who has been wonderful and consistent with his 1.4 ERA. The question is, where's Eddie Fitzpatrick been? Where has everyone else in this bullpen been? Because if the bullpen can't say, hey, 7th inning, 8th inning, 9th inning, Jake Miller, Eddie Fitzpatrick, followed by Jake Rowan, I think you're in a lot of trouble.
Really, if they can get the bullpen started, then I think they're going to be able to get to the form where they were last year. This is all for Ohio Sports Zone. This is Nick Mullins alongside Mitchell and John Kasich.